Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Pants Required webinar. I'm Maria Sims, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues. I'm president of Big Fork Tech, and I'm also a lawyer. And I'm joined by these two lovely women you see on your screen right now. I hope you can see them. And they both are very accomplished lawyers and businessmen and businesswomen, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves while I try to call up our PowerPoint here. Paloma, you first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Paloma Amati. I'm counsel in the Labor and Employment Group of Haynes & Boone. We're a full-service law firm with offices across the country and around the world. I'm based in our San Antonio and New York offices, and because I focus on labor and employment, what I've done a lot of in the past few months is help employers and their workforces adjust to the challenges posed by COVID-19, the initial going home, the returning to work, and some of the adjustments and really hard decisions that companies have had to make as we confront the accompanying economic upheaval.
Excellent. And we're so delighted to have you, and you're going to give us so much great information about some of the employment issues and labor issues that we're all dealing with as we try to adjust to this new normal. So thank you for being here. And we also have Gretchen Jacobs. Gretchen, welcome.
Oh, hi, hello. So I am an attorney as well, licensed in California and Arizona. And after just a few years of working actually a couple of years working in litigation, I felt like I'd had enough, and especially of the billable hours. So I moved to Arizona and switched into government affairs and have really, really enjoyed it. I've worked for 5 years at Greenberg Traurig in chairing their government affairs department, and then went back to my own small firm, which I operate, representing clients, nonprofits and businesses before the Arizona legislature and government regulatory agencies.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you, ladies, and welcome. And again, I'm Maria Sims. I'm the president of Big Fork Technologies. My resume pales in comparison to these wonderful women, but I'll try to keep up today. I have about 25 years of legal experience, both in the public and private sector. I was an assistant United States attorney and assistant attorney general. I was in private practice for many years doing litigation with large multinational companies. And technology has always been something that has had fits and starts throughout my career, as I know all of us, as we've seen the evolution of it. And I've learned a few things along the way, and now I am president of Big Fork Technologies, and I work hard to try to help others find greater efficiency and save time and money and make their businesses run better, which I think is particularly important nowadays, especially when we are in this very crazy time. I just had my daughter's birthday yesterday. She turned 13 years old, my youngest, and it really was a time to reflect on, gosh, wow, what a time she's growing up in, and think about how difficult it is for her to understand, and I appreciate it because it's just as difficult for us to navigate all of these things. So hopefully today we will be able to address some of the employment issues, some of the social distancing issues, some of the risk associated with opening back up, how much you want to open back up versus can you continue to work remotely. Our Pants Required has been a little joke because our earlier webinars we've been doing has been on Pants Optional for learning how to work remotely.
That's good. I was wondering what that was.
So yeah, it's a little play on that, but yeah, I know we've seen a lot in the news of all the jokes that are going around about people forgetting to put their pants on when they're doing their work meetings from home. But now that we're venturing back in, we got to put our pants back on, our big girl pants on, and try to figure out how we're going to make sense of all of this. So whatever best practices we employ today, I think we're pretty clear that they're going to be here to stay, because this really truly is the new normal. I don't think anybody's expecting to go back to the way business as usual was done before COVID. So I think it's funny. I have this cute quote up because I thought it was kind of funny. We don't have to put people in spacesuits, but we have to do more than hand sanitizers. And I think we have to do quite a bit more than just hand sanitizers. And we'll talk about that today. I just want to remind everyone also that if you push the Q&A button on your little platform there in Zoom, you can ask us any questions and we're happy to answer them. And I'll make this presentation available to our attendees afterwards. And we'll, of course, happy to answer any questions that you may think of afterwards as well. So ready, set, reopen. Not so simple. You know, we're starting to emerge from the pandemic. We have to refocus our efforts and on the return to the workplace from, as I said, from working remotely. And the challenge that I think people face, and the panelists and I have talked about this amongst ourselves as well, and also with my colleagues, is that we're getting so many mixed messages. And I was reading an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, you know, that the CEO of the Pepsi bottling plants, they're giving surgical masks to all their workers and they're checking temperatures. Coca-Cola is giving the employees the thermometers to check for themselves and face covers. And so I think the rule of thumb is that everybody has to be really flexible as this environment is evolving. Not only do you have to deal with the social distancing and making sure that people have their faces covered and all of that and gloves, but you have to deal with the executive orders from the various governors around the country, the CDC guidelines. So you're getting mixed messages. Just the other day, the CDC came out with a report that only 6% of COVID is spread through touch, which flies in the face of all the sanitizing we've been doing with the packages and all of that. So how do we make sense of this? And how do we instill a sense of confidence in not only our customers and the way we do business, but also our employees, to make them feel safe coming back to the workplace in whatever capacity and whatever form that takes. And as I was thinking about this and putting this together for everyone, I realized that a lot of the materials that we read about are so focused on the social distancing that we need to, I think it's important for everybody to take a step back and look at leadership and how that can be a real driver here. And this is an opportunity to reassess where we are and where we're going. And leadership is a critical part of that. So we're gonna talk about leadership. We're gonna talk about our HR policies, our protective measures, and then we'll wrap up with the road ahead. And as I said, we can talk about whatever questions you may have along the way. So leadership, why is it more important than ever to look at leadership? Well, since we've had this downtime, I think a lot of businesses have used the opportunity to revisit their mission and really assess how they're going to show customers, how they're going to show employees that they're adding value. There was, I saw an example of the company Lysol, for example. The employees at Lysol were able to work the factory, and they knew that they were going to have security, and it was a great company to work for, but they weren't really vested in the larger mission. And so what the leaders at Lysol did is they brought all their employees and factory workers in, and they said, you know, you're really playing a significant role in this pandemic and making the world a better place. And so I think that that's a great example, so that anyone, a project manager, a team member, a CEO, general counsel, can really stop and think about how they can get their team vested in what they're doing, reassess what their mission is, see how their mission can dovetail with what's happening in real time in society. And I think that that will really make your company stronger going forward because it gives context to what you're doing and puts it in real time with what's happening all around us, the elephant in the room, so to speak. It also will enable you to collaborate better with your customers and sort of you can team up and understand what your shared challenges are. So here at Big Fork, for example, we have clients that are dealing with contracts all around the country in different states And so having that seamless integration of our platform to be able to help people do business remotely and address all the new regulations that are coming at them so quickly has been very helpful, because they have teams all over the country that are collaborating across state lines, and to have one platform to be able to do that has been really helpful and given confidence to our clients. And so anything that you can do as a business where you can empathize, so to speak, with your customers, and share some of your tricks that have been helping you. That's one of the reasons we've been doing our remote working webinars here at Big Fork. We talk to our clients and help them with the pitfalls and the advantages of what's happening with remote working. So anything that you can do like that as a business leader, that's a way of leading, and it's a way of showing that you really are adding value in the industry. And it builds trust, as I say on here, renewing trust with your stakeholders. It builds trust with them. And of course, a thing that we're going to keep coming back to, I think, throughout this hour is communication, and how important that is to make sure that you're instilling confidence in your team and in your customer base. So these are just a few of the things that I think kind of get lost in the urgency of all the social distancing. And I think it's very important as leaders and as team members to think about these issues and how you can continue to add value and how your mission can add value. Gretchen, do you want to talk about any of these things and how your clients may have been successful at this?
I actually was really impressed with everything you said. I do think that so many workers want to believe that they're a part of something bigger than just putting widgets together, and so I just love your point that let's get together, let's talk about how we make a difference and how we're handling this. So I love everything you said. I have nothing to add to it.
I just want to underline the last point that you made there, Maria, which is on communication, because that really is the foundation for forming that belief that it's safe to come back to work, that it's safe to come back to your business, whether for a client or for an employee. You know, having that relationship so that when you communicate out that you say you're open for business again, someone believes that you have been thoughtful about the safeguards that you need and thoughtful about the way that you're returning to work, is really so critical. And like you said, it really does all start with communication.
Absolutely. And I think that talking to your customers, really listening to them, is a very important aspect of that. So it reminds me of an example of, I read one story about a doctor's office that was really struggling to stay open, and a big drug company came in and offered them free consulting services in order to help them reopen, right? So that's a really synergistic relationship where the company benefits, but the doctor's staying open and continue to prescribe their drugs to help their patients. So again, that communication to build confidence and strength. And I think everybody on this call and afterwards, if you're passing this talk around, I hope there's one thing you remember is that you encourage your C-suite to think about these things, to help them identify pain points, listen to your customers. I mean, it's not enough to just say, oh, they're going to come in and ask, how you doing? Is everything okay? But really try to get granular with them, specific, because it will give you great ideas on how you can help. And that, when we're facing tough economic times, that will instill confidence in your customers for the long haul.
I know for me, not working in my business, but going to businesses, I am really evaluating how much are they cleaning. Is there just the visual cues of having the little Lysol containers nearby? And then after the meeting, watching to see if they do anything to clean the table or, anything visual that I see that they're doing really gives me confidence. So I'm assuming probably that would be helpful in businesses like mine.
I agree. And I think a lot of companies are doing that, and they are having a lot of signage. I think signage is very important. Even when you go into your grocery store, you see now on the floor, you see branding, yeah. And they put their branding on it, and they put their signage saying, walk this way or stay 6 feet apart. And I know personally, when I go to a store and I see that, that makes me feel okay about going again, right? If I go into a place, like you said, if they're not clean, if they're not following the CDC guidelines, you lose the confidence, you lose the trust. So anything that a business can do to shore that up is really, really important. Phil, I feel like you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, the point about signage is a critical one, and signage can be both internally and externally directed, of course. But one of the things that I've seen being done more and more is that signs that you might have typically posted in a break room. So, for example, wash your hands for an adequate time using soap and water every time the following things occur, or don't come to work if you're sick. Companies have started to put those in public places as well, so that the customers are also informed what rules are applying to the employees. And I think that has sort of a mutually reinforcing benefit. Employees are reminded of what the new company policies are, but customers also know how this employer is treating their employees.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of branding, I have a slide here that we just talked a lot about the branding, but let's not forget also, I would just add that this is also an opportunity. I talked earlier about looking at your mission again. It's also a great opportunity to pivot your branding. So if you're going to align your mission with some of the critical challenges that your customers and the public at large is facing right now, you can adjust your branding to reflect that as well. So think a little bit outside the box. And I think a lot of people are starting to think wider about their being socially conscious and their broader purpose. And that really connects with your customers, but also makes your team feel far more vested for the long term. Okay. Again, just another reminder about renewing trust. This is an example of what Big Fork Tech does. We're constantly emphasizing with our clients how to make things more efficient, how to encourage growth and development at a cost savings, which is critical right now. So these are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about, of how you can build that trust and incorporate it into your branding for the long term. We talked about communicating. The one thing we didn't mention was that continuous communication, and having reliable and consistent communication is really important, really all the time, in order to portray yourself or position yourself as an authority in the area, as someone who really has a handle on the challenges that we're facing and has some value to offer people in that arena. Do you guys have any thoughts about, can it be overkill, too much communication? I know we're talking about it a lot. I know the government has a lot of booklets and reentry plans and that sort of thing. Can there be overkill if you're shoving so much information at people?
Well, I think you do need to be decisive, and just forwarding updates from the CDC or forwarding updates from your local regulatory authorities is not going to be meaningful. But I actually do encourage, in times like this, over communication, because I think that over communication is one of those ways that people feel like you're present. And particularly when you're working remotely, I think that, engaging in that kind of over communication keeps you a little bit more connected feeling than when because you need it. You're not in the office, you don't see one another. And just to make the point, literally, if you send an email on Monday saying, this week, I'm going to think about safe ways to come back to the office. If you want to weigh in, email me, I'm listening, and then on Friday you announce, I've thought about it, and here are the ways we're coming back to the office. Even if nobody sent you any suggestions,
right.
That is a much more effective way to have your employees believe that you went through a thoughtful process than if you just announce on Friday, hey, everybody, here's the plan for going back to the office. It feels like it came out of nowhere, particularly when you haven't seen one another.
Would you engage people to get their input? And then I know that often the CC will say, we want your input. And then they launch this plan that doesn't reflect anything that people submitted. What do you think about that? And I mean, I know what I think about that, and how effective that would be. But don't you think it would be best to have buy-in from the employees so that you at least reflect some of their concerns in this plan?
Well, buy-in isn't the same as consensus. And this is where I put on my lawyer hat for a minute, because I do think that when you solicit information about concerns about returning to the office, that's when your antenna needs to go up. Because, and we're going to talk about this more in a moment, but there are certain programs available. For example, if a person says, I'm having health challenges and I can't come back to the office, or I'm having childcare issues and I can't come back to the office, that's when your HR team can step in and help you address these, because that might be the first time that a person feels an opening to make that kind of statement. Similarly, if people are fearful about returning to the office, assuaging those fears rather than saying, well, you're young, so it doesn't matter if you get COVID, that type of response is less helpful, because, this is something that I'll talk more about later, but employees do need to perceive that their workplace is safe. And so when you solicit that feedback, you don't have to incorporate everybody's comments into your plan, because again, input is not the same thing as consensus, but you do need to have your ears open for those sensitive issues that may provide you an opportunity to address some employee requests that are legally protected.
Very well said. So let's start to get into some of the meat of those things. We talked about it from a leadership standpoint. Now we have to talk about it from a nuts and bolts standpoint so that we can look at how we manage our risk for some of those pitfalls that we were discussing. There we go. So we all understand that we're getting a ton of information. And so now you've got you're planning your reentry, and you have a general idea of how you want to start reopening, whether it's a soft reopen, whether it's partial, whether you're going to have your people continue to work remotely, your staffing, how you're going to rotate them, how you're going to pay everybody, how leave is going to work. You know in your mind you have all these issues to address, but then we have a challenge, because what regulations are you complying with? I have an example up on the screen now, the State of Arizona executive order, and then those executive orders get amended. And, for example, Gretchen and I are speaking to you from Arizona. Paloma's speaking to you from Texas, where we have an office there as well. How do you make sense of all of this? And Gretchen, being an expert in government affairs, I know that you have had to be particularly agile right now mentally to follow along with all of these things. And what are you advising your clients on how to address these things as they map out their plan for reopening?
What's nice about this meeting that we're having is we got to prepare. And honestly, I don't think anyone has a better sense of how to prepare to come back than Paloma. Not to deflect, but by the time I got done talking with her yesterday, I thought, wow.
You know who you're going to call.
More to do. Yes, call Paloma. That's my recommendation. Call Paloma.
Before we get to Paloma, just boots on the ground, and just maybe you could talk about how fast it's changing, just as far as Arizona goes. You're closed, then you're open, and then you got executive orders, you got CDC guidelines.
Yeah, and I think also the philosophy of a lot of people in Arizona, or at least a lot of old school Arizonans, I guess, is to be skeptical. And then I think there's good reason to be skeptical in some things, because things have changed so much. We were told, I remember arguing with someone saying, do not wear a mask. They've shown that it's more dangerous to wear a mask and then they said, oh, and then I can't believe I was repeating that. And then, I think there was also some discouragement, because I know when we first shut down, I thought, we're going to kill this virus. We're going to get over it. And then we're going to emerge, and it's going to be so exciting that this is over. And I think we've gradually come to the point where we realize that this is going to be integrated into our society for quite some time. And instead of just staying home, you need to change how you behave on a long-term basis. So Anyways, it has run the gamut, and there's a lot of obviously social unrest related to it, and a lot of strong opinions about whether ideas are good or what someone should be doing. And it's
strong opinions about a lot of things these days.
yes,
That's for sure. Seems like everybody's got the bullhorn. So what I get from a lot of folks, they ask me, they say, I'm complying with the CDC guidelines on social distancing. And the CDC certainly does have a lot of great information on their website. And I think they even have some reentry, reopening guidelines. They asked me, is that good enough? And I think from talking to Paloma and Gretchen, I think we know that that probably is not good enough. And unfortunately, there's more work to be done and more due diligence to be done on behalf of your team to make sure that you are protecting yourselves. And obviously risk is always a cost benefit analysis. You don't want to incur a tremendous amount of expense if you to dot every I and cross every T. But I think it goes back to trust and wanting to be compliant enough that you instill that trust and you demonstrate that you're taking prudent and reasoned measures to protect your team, your workers, and your clients and customers. But Paloma, would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So I think that one of the real challenges for companies is the multiplicity of orders that are out there right now, because there are these statewide orders issued by the governors. There are often local or municipal orders, sometimes overlaying county orders that you need to look at, because almost every level of government has tried to contribute to combating COVID-19. Not every one of those types of orders is binding. And it is not uncommon for those kinds of orders to conflict. And in each state, there are different procedures for interpretation. So for example, here in Texas, the governor's order preempts quite a few local order features. So you can actually just look at the governor's order to understand those legal limits. But then the State Department of Health has issued guidelines that, are similar to the CDC, but not identical. Then of course, there's the reopening plan, which is certainly ambitious and descriptive, but not a binding regulation. And so it's a matter of interpretation to put these all together and decide what's lawful, what's obligatory, and what's reasonable and a good idea. And as you look through the different layers of government, and obviously talk to your counsel, because this is something that can get really hairy. For example, other states have made the decision that there's going to be a certain level of statewide regulation, but then municipalities are actually empowered to go beyond that. So for example, if you're in one of those states and you're in city A and city B, the rules for your location in city A might be different than the rules for your location in city B. And so all of that is part of forming a return to work plan that complies with your legal obligations. And it's really complicated. And there's no overarching federal fix-it or federal standard that you can follow and just be fine everywhere. Unfortunately, this is determined on a case-by-case basis at the local level.
Those are all very good points. Does that mean everybody has to consult a lawyer? I know we have a lot of GCs on the call right now, so you guys are already in good stead. But what about the medium-sized business that may be struggling and doesn't have the resources to consult a lawyer? Where would you tell them to look?
So there are law firms that are publishing guides state by state, summaries state by state, summaries of local ordinances. There are groups working with small businesses to assist reopening compliance, either on a low bono or a pro bono basis. So for those smaller organizations, for nonprofits, for example, I know there are resources out there that are free. For example, Haynes and Boone, my own law firm, I think we've published almost 200 updates, guidance, letting people know what's out there in terms of new regulations, different regulations, and concepts to consider. One of the things that I'm really proud that we published is a series of checklists. So as you're considering returning to work, or if, for example, excuse me, you're dealing with a positive COVID test, a checklist for how to think about these issues. Ultimately, for legal advice, yes, you need to ask a lawyer. But, in terms of how to get started or where to start thinking about these things, I think those are some really helpful resources.
Excellent. And can they be found on the Haynes and Boone website?
Yes, and there's a button on our homepage, COVID-19 updates. Just click on that. It'll take you to the page that lists everything. There's some podcasts featuring yours truly, and there's also quite a few shorter episodes. So some of the podcasts are longer. We have a Return to Work series that's 2 one-hour episodes, but then we also have shorter 20-minute episodes about things like OSHA-specific issues, industry-specific matters, insurance matters, things that you might be thinking about and want to just orient yourself to.
Excellent. Gretchen, we have a lot of viewing to do, I think.
We really do. The one thing that hopefully will have that relates to the government that'll be helpful, other than just guidelines, is some liability reform for opening, as long as you're working in good faith. And so right now, I know Utah is the only state that I'm aware of right now, though I know a number are considering it, and I think they're even looking at it at a federal level. And Arizona is expected to have a special session here and to look at what the standard would be. But basically, if you are working in good faith and you are trying to do everything right, you should be protected from lawsuits, liability, which hopefully will pass. I think hopefully the end of June is they're looking at.
Oh, wow. Great. I also heard, as an aside, that Arizona is looking to do a special session to address some of the new issues that are coming out in the news. So maybe they'll do all that in one and move the ball forward on everything. Okay, so I just put up some of the human resources policies that I think are good rules of thumb for anybody looking to reopen that they need to address. And I apologize for the background noise. That's one of the, I hope you can't hear it too badly. It's one of the challenges of remote working. The gardeners next door have decided to descend on my neighbor's house. So hopefully they'll be gone shortly. But and Paloma and Gretchen, please let me know if you want to speak to any of these things. Obviously, what's on everyone's mind is workplace safety guidance, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And I think that's where the CDC really does have a lot of comprehensive information on their website from what I've seen. We've talked about signage being important, face coverings, and all the disinfectant and temperature checks, and we'll go into that a little bit more, obviously not too in-depth in an hour, but just want to put these things up there for folks to start thinking about. Remote work, I think the Association of Corporation Counsel has a sample model remote work policy to, for folks that still want to work from home. If the company doesn't feel like they need to have everybody right in the office at the same time. And this obviously, you can rotate shifts and you can address social distancing in that manner. Leave policy, obviously that is a little bit more complicated, and we're going to get into some of the federal laws related to leave policy, but it's a good time to look at your standard leave policy and see if under the current circumstances you need to make any adjustments to that. Attendance, again, right, with leave policy, we're going to talk about what happens, Paloma, if someone chooses not to show up for work, and what's the threshold, what's the OSHA threshold, and what can an employer do. Benefits, a good time to start looking, reevaluating your benefits, especially mental health benefits. We're reading a lot about alcohol, substance abuse during these trying times, and it might be a good time to look at your benefits. And I know you can't renew your benefits. Usually you can only renew your benefits one time a year, but when you do look at that, it might be a good time to reassess that plan and see if you want to provide that for your employees, and it might be a nice draw for people to come back to the workplace. Also, check on telehealth. Telemedicine, I know now all the regulations are gone in Arizona, and telehealth is really important, especially for people at high risk. And you want to make sure that that's all covered. I think that it probably is under your insurance policies, but you want to make sure you check that. Again, can't emphasize enough, ensuring compliance with state and local orders. So Paloma, if you want to address any of the, I mean, we could be here forever talking about all of the different federal regulations, but I think one of the key ones that we know are important and people are looking at is the Family and Medical Leave Act and the expansion of the Family and Medical Leave Act, which we started calling Families First, right?
Which Paloma and I have talked about, that there is, for Health and Human Services, there is another Families First bill that passed and had lots of great things in it. And so it could be confusing if you were looking at that passed earlier, I think earlier, oh, it might've been late last year. I can't remember. Anyway, but this is the kind of the COVID Families First Act. So.
Right. And doesn't it just expand on the Family Medical Leave Act and expand those who are eligible, expand the reasons why you can take that time?
So it's a bit of a different, so it's called an expansion of FMLA, but I think that's almost a bit of a misnomer, and it can be really confusing because the almost every feature of that is different. The eligibility is different than for regular FMLA. The documentation requirements are different. Critically, this leave is paid and FMLA is not paid. And this leave interacts pretty meaningfully with the emergency paid sick leave that was also in the same act. And so you've really got to look at those two things together when you have employees taking leave for one of the 6 protected reasons. Typically, you've been told to quarantine, you have COVID, you're getting tested for COVID, you're caring for someone with COVID, or you're caring for a child whose place of care is closed because of COVID. And these are going to be in place until the end of the year. But I think it's really critical right now that we think about these regulations as we return to work, because if you're sending reactivation notices to furloughed employees saying, come back to work, and you're getting a response that says, I can't, my child's school is closed and I have no childcare, that doesn't mean that the person just gets terminated. That means that person is eligible for leave. And so, or maybe eligible for leave depending on how their service time lines up. So again, as you start to bring people back to the workplace, think about these different leave options and whether or not your employees may qualify for them. And the way that they work together specifically is if you have an employee who's unavailable because of childcare, that their child's place of care is closed, the first 2 weeks can be paid up to 100% or $511 per day, whichever is less. And then the remaining 10 weeks, for 12 weeks total, are paid at up to $200 a day for $10,000 maximum. And so those things work together. 2 weeks of higher pay, 10 weeks of lower pay. And this is all job protected leave. So in the absence of, well, there's a couple of reasons why you might not be job protected, but if you have a right to reinstatement to the same or similar position after you finish this leave. So that's the other really critical thing here is you can't just dismiss someone for taking expanded FMLA. And
what is the restriction on that? The size of the company, right? So
this, unlike regular FMLA, this applies to employers with under 500 employees, down to even employers who don't typically come under the FMLA regulation. So very small employers can be covered by this. And it's, if you have fewer than 50, you can claim an exemption by documenting it. And you can look at the requirement. There's a requirement.
But you have to, and I think this is critically important, you have to affirmatively claim this exemption. Mm-hmm. Otherwise it applies to you. So if you're struggling and you can't afford to have somebody not at the office and hold that job open and you have to hire someone else, you have to apply for an exemption, correct?
With the state an exemption. It's not an application, I don't believe. I believe you document the requirements.
Okay.
And very early in the process, there was actually no documentation available about how to get an exemption. There's now greater levels of information available from the DOL, but you don't send it into the DOL. You document for yourself why your employees are not eligible. And again, it has to be fewer than 50. Make sure you're counting correctly. If you are part of a corporate family, you may need to aggregate the numbers. And so really look carefully at the guidance. And of course, if you're confused, call counsel, because I think that there are some traps here that because it's called FMLA, people are thinking of it differently. And it's not the same as FMLA. They're calling it an FMLA expansion, but just think of it as a completely new kind of leave.
Okay. Good to know. And I guess when in doubt, where can people find all of this? I mean, this is the slide that I have up is just been in the news and it's a summary. But Paloma, where would you direct people to look to get a clearer picture of how they relate and what their rights and liabilities are under it?
So my law firm and many, many others have published summaries of the laws and updates as they become amended and as the guidance is updated. The DOL has published a number of summaries on their website, which is also helpful. And SHRM has also published some great guidelines and documents around how to implement the FFCRA leave allowances as just some publicly available resources. And again, though, I think it's really important to make sure you understand it and make sure your managers are prepared and empowered to implement it, because your frontline managers are really your eyes and ears. And so it doesn't really matter if all the senior executives are up on it. If the managers who are making the calls to say come back to work don't know how to handle requests like this, that's where you really run into committing a foot fault or worse. And so I think, as you learn as an organization, make sure you're pushing that information outward in terms of updates to your managers, revised corporate policies, making sure that everybody knows what the company answer is, and not saying, well, we don't offer paid sick leave. Like that's not the answer anymore.
Well, that goes back to a question from one of our participants that I received earlier, was about what if the person just doesn't, I open back up, everybody's ready to go, I've put out my plan, and this person just doesn't want to show up for whatever reason. Maybe they're doing better with the state unemployment and federal COVID relief.
So this is actually something that I get asked a lot, because employers will say, well, I had an employee, they're on unemployment, but they refused to come back to work. And this is where I'm interested to hear Gretchen's thoughts on this as well. I'm very curious how the enforcement environment is going to evolve, because in the beginning, unemployment agencies were so overwhelmed that it was all they could do to process the new claims. But as employers start to certify that they have offered a return to work or made an offer of adequate employment or suitable employment to someone who is on unemployment benefits, typically that removes your availability for unemployment benefits with some very limited exceptions. So for example, here in Texas, if you are on unemployment and your employer recalls you and you say no, that should cut off your benefits because you've turned down acceptable work. Now, they've created some wiggle room for COVID. If you believe you're at risk for COVID, if you currently have COVID, those are some reasons that you can refuse. But what I always say is, make sure you're making these return to work offers in writing. Don't do it as a casual process, because if you're calling somebody who's making more money on unemployment than they did in wages, and you say, do you want to come back? The answer is no, thank you. Mm-hmm. But if you send a letter saying, I am reinstating you and your shift begins Monday at 9, that's different. And I think that, having those kind of casual conversations can create a lot of confusion, but can also put an employer in a kind of a questionable situation, because then you don't know, has the person refused to come back? Do they want to postpone coming back? Can I do that? Is there a protected reason behind this? Is there something that I've missed? And so make sure you're giving those reminders or return to work notifications in writing, and make sure that you're having a dialogue with employees. Now, if an employee is completely non-responsive, typically companies will have policies on job abandonment. And, once the person has met the threshold for your policy for job abandonment, such as like 3 absences that are unexcused, then you can go ahead and proceed with your policy as you normally would if you have no reason to believe that there's anything else going on. So that's one way to handle it, is, follow your job abandonment policy. But, that's usually not that clear cut. What I hear a lot of is, oh, I called the employee. I said, would you be interested in coming back? They said, not really. And then I didn't really talk to them for a few days, but then I had been hoping they would come back on Monday. And, they never affirmatively said they were coming back on Monday. Don't let it get messy. Yeah. Write it down, be clear in your expectations and clear in your communications, and clear with your employees, because, that there may be protected rights at play here, or, there may be some recourse for the employer. For example, if an employee has rejected an offer of suitable employment.
Don't let it get messy. I think that's a good theme for reentry. Don't let it get messy, which brings us to, and I'm glad we spent that time on the compliance and the human resources, because I think those are really complicated questions, and they're just, I feel like we discuss it and it just begs more questions. So I'm really glad that you're directing people to your website, and they hopefully can get some more clarity. And again, we are open for questions even when this webinar concludes. But here we have, it takes us right into protective measures cleaning, and I did want to touch on this. We talked about leadership, we talked about HR policies. I think kind of incorporating all that is that it really is a team effort, and to have a reentry task force is probably a good best practice for you to have, or best practice for you to have, because there's a lot of moving parts, and you can assign people to lead in different areas, be it the social distancing, be it the temperature checks, be it the cleaning and disinfecting, be it the HR and compliance. So I just wanted to put this up here as reminders that there is still no cure, and we need to take a very measured and reasoned approach to reopening where we maximize safety for everyone involved. And that involves a cleaning and disinfecting schedule, increasing the frequency of cleaning your air exchanges, providing PPE and hygiene supplies. And again, it's all going to be what your business makes the most sense for your business. When I go see my dentist, I have to put booties on, I have to put a hair on.
I had the same thing.
They gave me a plastic dress to put on. They took me into a separate room, did the temperature check, did my blood pressure, took my pulse, and even figured out a way to do dental work with a mask on by putting it up over my mouth, and I was pretty much blinded and had it over my nose for the entire time. Bring your AirPods because you're going to want to listen to something pleasant while you're enduring all of that. So, but not every business is going to need that, obviously. So, and you're going to find different approaches even in healthcare offices where, they're really being very careful. So figure out what is best for your business, and what, and a good place to start is with the CDC guidelines, right?
And one of the things I want to mention here in terms of your cleaning and disinfecting is talk to your vendors, because a lot of companies do not do their own cleaning. They have outsourced relationships, and so talk to your vendors. Talk to them about what they're willing to do, whether you need to increase staffing of cleaning personnel, whether you need to increase shifts, how they're approaching these things, whether they are using disinfectant correctly has become a really hot button issue. According to its label instructions, is far more effective than if it's being, for example, diluted. And so talking to your vendors and making sure that they're doing what you expect them to is going to be really critical. Talking to your other relationships like your landlord, your parking provider, all of these things to make sure that each piece of an employee's experience as they come into the office is the way you expect in terms of your safety protocols.
And also in terms of customers, again. So just a reminder also that you don't necessarily have to bear the burden of the expense of all of this cleaning and gloves. When I go to the doctor, they add on a little charge for you to have the gloves and all of that. And I think people are very willing to pay it at this time. So keep that in mind, that you don't have to bear the entire financial burden, as we are all in this together. And a lot of people bring in their own mess, right? So that's also something to think about. Social distancing and testing in addition to disinfecting. Again, all of this is going to be very dependent if you're running a big factory versus a small office, what physically you're capable of in your office. For example, I'll go back to the doctor's office waiting room. They have configured it so that you couldn't possibly sit within 6 feet of someone. They've blocked off the chairs. Some doctors' offices are now having people go directly. There's no waiting room anymore. You go directly into the office. As far as temperature checks and testing, that opens up a whole constitutional can of worms on rights to privacy. All us lawyers are getting, the hairs on the back of our neck stand up when we see this. So I mentioned that the doctor took me into a private room for temperature checks. If you're checking your employees with doing temperature checks and testing, how do you want to do it? Are they going to be doing it themselves and logging it? Are you going to, I think if I were to recommend and you had the capability to do it, I probably would recommend outsourcing that to medically trained personnel who come in and do those temperature checks. how are you going to store that information? You want to keep it as minimal as possible. You don't want any identifying information. And then what if somebody does have COVID? What are your protocols for that? And as a leader in the organization, you're going to have to reinforce all of those social distancing and disinfecting behaviors. You know, you can't, what did I see? Gretchen was at the governor of New Mexico. She put everybody on lockdown, and then she had a jewelry store open so she could buy a necklace when there was no curbside pickup at that time. You'll have to Google it, Gretchen. You'll love that story. But as leaders,
there was a mayor in some town that said, even though there's required social distancing, I need my hair done because everyone's going to see me. So it's good. Just open for me.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So remind your C-suite and leaders that we have to lead by example.
Yes.
And there should not be a different set of rules depending on where you fit in the company hierarchy. And the rules should be the same for the employees. You treat your employees as well as you would treat your customers who come in the door when it comes to all of this. So very briefly, I know we're coming to the last 10 minutes of our talk here. So Paloma, if you have any big ticket items you want to mention on this.
Just a couple. So with respect to social distancing, first of all, it's a great time to be in plexiglass. You know, a lot of folks are having to re-envision their office spaces and moving away from the open plan that's become so popular, and putting up walls, cubes, plexiglass barriers to create individual spaces once again. With respect to temperature checks and testing, there are a lot of privacy issues here. Any medical record that you collect needs to be treated as a medical record under the ADA. It can't be in the personnel file. It needs to be in a separate file. It needs to be strictly limited in terms of access. The other thing to think about here is, you know, and Maria started to get into this, what do you do if you have a positive test? And we've, Haynes & Boone has published a checklist on this issue, which I think is really helpful and flags a lot of the high points. But, you know, employee privacy is a big one. And so just to you know, I know people wouldn't do this, but just in case, make sure that you are protecting your employee privacy. You don't run around saying, "Oh, Joe Smith has COVID." Like that's not the right way to proceed. So, you know, check out the checklist, look at the guidance, make sure you're respecting employee privacy as you proceed.
And especially since the tests are changed, you know, we're concerned about the reliability of testing, false positives, false negatives.
I think they're very, very reliable because they said that I had the antibodies. So I'm just with the reliability
is making her antibodies available to anybody in need.
Yeah, I'm going to start selling them.
Arizona Governmental Affairs, you know who to reach out to. So here, this slide just goes a little more depth about social distancing, reminding everybody to limit gatherings and to continue to leverage your technology in order to do that. Rotate your schedules, continue with the telework. It really makes sense. So just don't forget, just because we're back to work doesn't mean we have to be back to work the way we were. We talked about the temperature checks. We talked about the leaders reinforcing that. And then I just wanted to kind of conclude talking about the road ahead and financial viability. One of the things that weighs on business owners is how are we going to do all of this financially? We're really being hit hard. And it doesn't look like we're going to be, well, it looks like the recovery is going to take quite some time. So, you know, when the PPP runs out, what do? Well, you should be also looking at how you can cut your costs wisely. A lot of vendors are offering specials. You should be revisiting your vendors, see how you can cut costs in that area. When you bring your employees back, figure out, you're going to do it on a part-time basis in order to make the rent. What is your capability? And you should also be looking at hiring policies. I know it seems kind of strange to think about hiring new people at this point, but there's a lot of talent out there with unemployment skyrocketing. And maybe it's a good time to reassess some of the folks that you have and say, you know, maybe they're not adding as much value as someone else might. So take this opportunity to see how you can maximize your efficiency in your office with your workforce. We talked about revisiting your vendor model, your business model. We talked a lot about, we know about PPP, we know about the federal programs, but there are a lot of local programs also. The United States Chamber of Commerce, I know, has been spearheading a lot of efforts on the local level. Gretchen, have you heard about any of that with your clients here in Arizona? Or?
I have not. I know that the chambers are doing quite a bit, but I haven't been on a chamber talk call where I've heard things going on. But
I think that is something to encourage your clients to look at and see if, because, you know, the wheels of Washington move slowly. So make sure you look at local programs to supplement things. Anything else in these areas? I think cutting costs wisely, I think that I would add, I'm getting a lot of companies that are calling Big Fork Tech, for example, to say, you know, we've been using a project management software. It's pretty expensive. What kind of deal can you offer us? What kind of capabilities do you offer? So not only should you be looking at financial deals, but you should also be looking at what kinds of tools that you might need where you can get more for your money. And so we've been doing a lot of demos and showing people what we offer, and oftentimes for less money than what they're paying right now. So you should be doing that. That's just one example. You should be doing that with all of your vendors and encourage your clients to do the same to see where they can increase efficiency.
The only thing I would add to any of that, because this is all wonderful advice, is, you know, a lot of times you can feel that pressure to make a decision very quickly. And, you know, these times are very stressful. And sometimes looking at the amount of cash runway you have left feels like, you know, okay, well, everything is on fire. And so I think that, you know, giving yourself the time and space to make good decisions, and then write down why you made that decision, because when you're overwhelmed, when you're working fast, you won't remember why. So write it down, help yourself, help future you understand what current you was thinking, so that you can remember why you did certain things. For example, if you renegotiate a deal with a vendor, make sure you memorialize it. And it's not just like,
you are preaching to the choir, Paloma, because one of the things that I hate to keep coming back to it, but I have to tell folks that Big Fork Tech, our software, our project management software, we memorialize everything in one dashboard, where even your email correspondence and tracking, if you lose an employee and a new employee comes on, they can go into the project, they can see the entire history laid out for them, so that they're never reinventing the wheel. And exactly what you're pointing out, it's very important to keep track of exactly what you've decided, what the bids are, where you are in the process, so you don't have to keep doing it over and over again. It costs time and money and a lot of headaches that we can alleviate. So finally, just a few mentions on liability. We did talk a lot about that when we were talking about human resources and that sort of thing. Gretchen, you said Arizona is coming into special session to address some of this, hopefully. I've heard employers are actually having, or businesses are having customers come in and sign waivers and liability. And as lawyers, liability protections, and as lawyers, we know that oftentimes they're not really worth much, that they're really a deterrent to people maybe bringing a lawsuit because they think that they don't have the right to. So just be very careful of that. Barring legislation in this area, I think it's going to be very hard to enforce that. And we're all kind of looking down the road to see what kind of lawsuits, and there are some lawsuits that have already been filed.
Yeah.
To that very briefly, Paloma, because we're wrapping up.
Sure. Yeah. So just really, really briefly, there are already lawsuits about COVID-related matters. So keep watching, because there are only going to be more. The other thing I will point out is if you're considering using a waiver for your employees, not so fast, because OSHA still applies. So as an employer, you still have an obligation to provide a reasonably safe workplace. OSHA is investigating employee allegations that their workplaces are unsafe because they do not offer sufficient protections against COVID. So just make sure that you are handling those responsibilities correctly.
Excellent. Well, I just want to wrap it up by saying it looks like COVID-19 will be over, but the social and economic repercussions are going to be here for much longer, and it's a real minefield to navigate from a lawyer and business person's perspective. I hope that some of the things that we shared today get you thinking about being on the path to the best practice.
Paloma, and buying some software that's going to make it simpler.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gretchen, for those shout outs. But yeah, so I think that I'm very happy that you were able to join us today. It's a lot to take in, and I hope that it's helpful.
And I love this slide. I love it. I love it.
Well, want to end on a positive note, and I think everybody's been doing great. I mean, just in my experience in the business community, the legal community, people have really been coming together and doing whatever they can to help each other navigate this. And I hope that we, in some small part, were able to help you today. I want to thank Paloma at Haynes and Boone. Gosh, what information you gave us, what great information you gave us as a specialist in labor and employment. Thank you. And Gretchen, you are fantastic. And relationships at Arizona Governmental Affairs, boots on the ground with the ever-evolving regulatory minefield that we have to navigate. So thank you both for your contributions, and you can always contact us at info@bigforktech.com. I can put you in touch with any of them. You can go to Haynes and Boone website. I know that they have a lot of information for you, or there's my email and my personal cell phone number. Thank you so much for joining us. I will make this available to you, and we are available for any further questions you may have in the future. Take care. Good luck with reopening. We know you're going to be a success. Thank you.
Thank you so much.